Hi everyone, my name is Marguerite Harden and I'm the Local Resiliency Manager at the Department of Local Affairs, Division of Local Government, Colorado Resiliency Office. So I am very excited to share this interesting and important opportunity with you, which is here, the Colorado COVID-19 Regional Resiliency and Recovery Roadmaps, which we will be calling for short the Recovery Roadmaps throughout this presentation. So I am the program manager for this opportunity, but today I'm going to be really introducing and having the partners that you see listed at the bottom of this slide present on this opportunity that we have shaped and created together. And specifically, we'll be talking about how you as a local government and your partners can start forming regional teams and submit a letter of interest for this opportunity, which is due on December 1st. And then the opportunity will extend for about 2 years until December 2022. So specifically, our partners will be discussing first a background about this opportunity, and then we will be going into specifics of what the award, the Technical Assistance Award is and what regional teams can expect. And then we'll be going into why and how you can engage in this opportunity and how you can form regional teams, and specifically what our selection criteria will be for forming those teams. So with that, I am going to pass it on to our Rural Prosperity Manager, my colleague at the Colorado Resiliency Office, Kate Guibert.
Hi, everybody. Before we kind of dig into the technical details of what this opportunity might look like and the process for engaging with us on it, we wanted to just create a little bit of a broader context about why this conversation matters and what the opportunity within it is. So I want to talk a little bit about long-term recovery. What are some of the opportunities we've been seeing within COVID? So in recovery, one of the most important things that we talk about in the Colorado Resiliency Office is really have to know where we're going. Right now, I know a lot of us are moving day to day, hour by hour. We're having a hard time being able to get beyond just surviving the constant change that we're surrounded by. But it's really important that we continue to remember what our vision is in our community, what our values are, what our goals are, so that the decisions that we make along the way help us get to our destination. We still get to have hopes and dreams in our communities right now. So this is really kind of the value of this long-term planning piece, is to take a step back and look at where we want to go, recognizing that the path we take to get there may change along the way, but the goals are still the same. Next slide. So I live in Crested Butte, Colorado, and I just saw this great documentary called High Country. And it is about kind of the cycle of the different eras that have happened in Crested Butte. So there are many eras and a much longer history before this in Crested Butte, but in terms of economic eras, we look at mining, the era of snow, the era of tourism. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that we really don't want this to be the era of the pandemic for us going forward. We want to take back that narrative and have this be the area of entrepreneurs, the era of agricultural renaissance, the era of conservation, whatever it is that we want the next era to look like in our community, we still have the opportunity to define that, to not let the narrative be run by the pandemic. Next slide. There are some silver linings in COVID-19 if you look really hard, and we have learned a lot. And these lessons come from an adaptation guide that the Colorado Resiliency Office created in partnership with a team of rural experts from across the state. And some of the things that we've learned is this startup mindset. So we're all moving really quickly. We're testing and trying things. I've never seen state government move so fast. I've never seen local government move so fast. We now more than ever understand the value of relationships. We are learning from each other. We're sharing ideas. We're sharing resources. That's critical in a pandemic. That's critical in a fire. These are critical lessons throughout any disruptions we might face. We're finding ways to yes. So we're cutting the red tape. We are, again, getting rid of barriers that maybe we've had for years in our community that we've debated, and overnight we are just going to go ahead and try something different. We're really focusing on our own. the people and parts of our community that make our places unique. So we're doubling down on those assets. We are relying on entrepreneurs to come up with solutions. We are relying on interesting ideas from the designers and architects in our communities. We are finding the people that make our communities great and utilizing them. And we're learning to rapidly assess, which is just a generally important resilience lesson. Is this working? Is it not? Do we need to try something new? These are fantastic lessons. These are things that we hope that we can continue into blue sky times. And these are just, again, opportunities for us to think about when we start to think about long-term recovery, what the opportunities might be to carry these with us. Next slide. So just a few more thoughts on change and opportunity. With these roadmaps that we're hoping to support, we really want to take advantage of what trends or opportunities might be emerging as a result of a pandemic, or maybe they were accelerated as a result of the pandemic. So consumer behavior might be shifting. People are really focusing on place and buying local. There's opportunity within that. People are shifting to purchasing online, and there's opportunity to figure out how to help our small businesses do that. Talked about the power of place. People are really seeking their places of connection within their communities, even though we are apart. And they will be doing that even more so when we're able to be all together again. Different ways of working. We talk a lot about the potential for location independent work right now, and that we all can work anywhere, and we live in the most beautiful state. So what are the opportunities to attract some of those workers to our parts of the state while taking into account housing affordability challenges, infrastructure challenges that may exist in some of our smaller, more rural communities? And we also want to think about with these roadmaps that these aren't our first, this isn't going to be our first disruption. They will continue, and we're seeing them overlay right now. So we have the pandemic, and we have some of the biggest wildfires we've ever had in state history. We've had social equity challenges. We are going to face climate change. But the point being is that we don't want to focus on what the disruption is. We want to build the strategies for our communities to be able to buffer against those challenges. So that's part of what we hope these roadmaps will help set up. Recognize where those interlink, recognize how they impact our communities, and build strategies so that no matter what the disruptions are our communities are facing, we might be able to diversify or absorb them better. Talked a lot about place. I want to talk a little bit about kind of an economic development pyramid and some of the opportunities within that, with community development being at the base of that pyramid, which is really focusing on workforce development, leadership development. What's the infrastructure that we need to support entrepreneurs and small businesses to come to our communities? Placemaking, what makes our places special, which is going to be really important when we have downtowns that have been very disrupted by this pandemic. And just the opportunity to think about infrastructure differently. We've already been doing that. We're expanding out into our streets. We're sharing spaces. We're creating ghost kitchens. There's a lot of opportunity in the nimbleness of those models, regardless of if we're in a pandemic or not. So the reason to highlight some of these opportunities is we want these roadmaps to create the opportunity for you to reimagine. Not that you abandon who you are. You start first and foremost with what's important to your community. But you just start to think that, what if there was no tourism or no agriculture, whatever the main driving force is in your community? Not that those things are going away overnight, but what might be some other things that we could use to buffer against that? What are services we could provide to our community? What are industries that we could attract? And we hope these plans enable us to do that and think big and bold about, what we could be and want to be. So, with that, I think I have one more slide. We touched a little bit on this, which is this regional approach. We are much stronger working together right now. Many of our economies are intertwined. If we can leverage those resources and work together, that is going to be the crux of these roadmaps and this process for us, is to really take advantage of that opportunity of working together. So that's the big context, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Andy Hill, who is the Director of the Community Development Office in DOLA, and she's going to talk a little bit more in detail about what this opportunity will look like.
Thanks, Kate. All right, well, while this is not a grant program, if we receive the funding we have requested, we will be offering significant state technical resources to selected regional community teams. So let's get into some of the details. First, for communities that come together to participate in this program, you can expect the following outcomes. A resilient economic recovery strategic action plan for each regional community team. That's a bit of a mouthful, so as Kate and Marguerite mentioned, we're calling it the roadmap. One benefit of this program is your team will be working through problems and exploring solutions similar to others around the state. And this program will foster a cohort approach so you can learn from each other. In addition, the case studies and the best practices shared on remote or peer learning platforms will be open and accessible for all other communities to benefit. Participating communities will be well positioned for implementation funding. And the goal, of course, is to help communities adapt to and cope with change and develop a resilient recovery. So let's talk about the timeline a little bit. While we wait to hear whether Colorado will receive funding for this program, we'd like to encourage the formation of regional teams through this letter of intent, because we understand that can take time to nail down. We know communities are working on response and recovery right now. So once we hear about funding, we will move quickly. With that in mind, we have been intentional in crafting an LOI that's an easy lift for interested regional community teams to complete. While it is due on December 1st, as you can see here, it's a very short form made up of just 3 questions. At this time, you only need 1 lead applicant community to complete the LOI. And the LOI is not required to submit a formal application when that time comes. However, the formal application will have a quick 1-month turnaround. Starting now to formulate regional teams will be critical to getting the application submitted in time. Also, we strongly encourage you to contact your DOLA regional manager to discuss your interest and get advice on how to be competitive for selection. The date for the release of the formal application is pending funding. If we do not receive the funding, we are still committed to supporting this regional recovery work. We just won't be able to provide as robust of a program. The formal application will require signatures or letters of support from partner communities that you're proposing for your team and metrics that relate to our selection criteria. The formal program will span 2 years. And so let's get into some of the details about what will be involved and how it will work. Next slide. So this graphic gives you an overview of the process. The state team will offer roadmap development and implementation support to the regional community teams that are selected. The Colorado Nonprofit Community Builders has developed a roadmap to recovery framework, and we will partner to build on that framework to benefit communities across the state. Regional community teams will be able to customize the framework to fit your team's needs. Phase 1, or the groundwork phase, will help each team get started on the right foot to ensure these plans move quickly and hear from all participating communities. Phase 2 focuses on plan development, and Phase 3 on implementation. But just as the response and recovery efforts have overlapped, the planning and implementation phases will also overlap and continue throughout the 2-year program period. As things continue to change, we will support your team's needs to shift back and forth on response and recovery as the situation demands, and allowing modification of your plans. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Jillian Sutherland from Community Builders to explain more of what to expect in Phase 1.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So something that is really unique, I think, about this program is that rather than diving right into planning, we have built in this laying the groundwork phase for communities. And we find ourselves at Community Builders often saying, you know, if you want to go fast, you have to go slow first in order to really be able to pick up steam. Everybody wants to jump right into solutions and strategies, understandably so. All of our communities have really been put through the ringer. But if we're too hasty in that effort, we can struggle to achieve the support that's necessary for implementation down the road. So because this program is so focused on regional teams and regional solutions, really building up your team up front will set you up for success down the road. In this groundwork phase, we really focus on taking a step back as a team to build that common foundation to build upon. And there are kind of 4 critical elements to this phase that the communities that participate will be going through. So first and foremost, you know, there is an emphasis on building your leadership structure and working on team building. So really getting into a discussion on your shared challenges as a region, what you consider to be your greatest regional opportunities.
Moving on from that, we'll discuss instances when our collaboration has been successful as a region and when it hasn't, so that we can identify the barriers that we need to address together to make sure that our effort is effective. Second, we'll work together to build a shared vision for our resilience planning. You know, what is it that everybody wants to accomplish? So getting on the same page about your common goals before you dive into solutions and looking for solutions. Third, we really want to make sure that we dialogue about how the pandemic has impacted our region, utilizing both data and also, you know, stories from across the region and, you know, the various organizations that are involved in the effort to really get a handle on the specific challenges that we're collectively facing. And then finally, we'll discuss in this phase how we want to approach communication and engagement as we start to embark on our planning effort. So the whole process is planned to take place over, you know, 4 to 8 regional team meetings, and that will really position every regional team to dive in full force into their planning effort.
Great, thank you, Jillian. Okay, now let's shift to phase 2. Once your team has done that groundwork that Jillian described, as she said, you'll be positioned to move through the plan development process pretty quickly. Grant funds will cover the cost for a consultant to help you draft your plan. We will handle the grant administration and procurement so you can focus on the work. Our state team will offer valuable data and resources to support your plan development. Kat's going to talk more in a moment about forming your teams, but consider us part of your team too. We are offering wraparound technical assistance from all the partners on this slide, and we'll be requesting all state partners to become involved as needed and as requested by your regional community teams from state and local health departments, nonprofits, and many others that you're probably already working with. Next slide. We will start the planning process where you are. That's the first and most important thing. If your region is already well underway on this type of planning effort, we'll just rework the scope for your consultant so you don't need to tread the same ground or lose momentum. The goal is to move quickly, but be thoughtful about building lasting resilience. The State Demography Office and OEDA will provide relevant data on population and industry trends and projections, and will provide updates throughout the process, even after your roadmap is developed, to allow for fine-tuning as things change. Your teams that want to will first assess needs and develop short-term recovery strategies to keep economies moving throughout the winter and spring. Then, as you're ready, we'll launch into the long-term strategy development. You'll be able to provide input in the selection of the consultant hired to work with you to develop your roadmap. And you can expect a mostly virtual process until it becomes safe to meet in person. Also, OEDIT, CDLE, Department of Labor and Employment, and DOLA's regional staff will meet with you regularly, staying connected to your progress and supporting your plan and development. We're going to hire regional economic recovery project managers to be your point of contact and assist you in project management, excuse me, so the burden isn't on the regional community team to handle meeting logistics and follow up with agencies to get answers to questions. Consider this person both a staff person you can lean on and a state rep that you can go to for questions, concerns, and share ideas. Finally, our goal is not to facilitate the development of another regional plan that repeats all the things you've included in other plans. Our intent is to provide enough resources and data that, combined with what you know about your communities, you can make the tough choices together. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Of course, you can make the tough choices together on exactly which projects you think will have the biggest potential for impact on your shared recovery, the biggest impact on your strength and resilience long term. At the end, you should have a reasonable list of priority strategies, and the state will be just as invested as you are in making sure those strategies are tested. It's our hope most teams will complete their process in several months so that we can focus time and energy with you on implementation during the 2-year program. Finally, the implementation stage. Your prioritized action plan gives your team your best chance at focusing everyone's efforts on the same strategies and getting them done. So we will be pushing regional community teams and their consultants to focus on 3 or 4 innovative, achievable, prioritized strategies. We hope these strategies will be informed by and integrated into your SEDS to ensure long-term commitment to their success. And we encourage you to partner closely with your COGS or economic development districts on this work. And your self-defined region may include more than one of those, and that's okay. We plan to keep funding agencies involved along the way with you, and by developing the strategies together, our intent is to position communities for future funding and support. In addition, we'll be looking for every opportunity we can to devote existing state resources and programs where they fit your strategies. To jumpstart implementation, one component we're really excited about provides a series of local economic activation projects that we call LEAPs that can accelerate the recovery and reimagination process through targeted deployment of technical and financial assistance to support projects. For example, a community-wide business to consumer e-commerce or shop local solution, or maybe a customized existing industry supply chain support plan, maybe a business development strategy for a specific industry. There are lots of opportunities, and you can talk to your rural opportunity reps from OEDIT to get additional ideas on how to use this resource. During this phase, the state partnership team will convene best thinking and cross-sector resources to help communities find implementation funding and other support to continue to make progress and maintain momentum for an equitable and prosperous recovery. Now I'd like to introduce Kat Pappenbrock, the Rural Opportunity Rep from OEDIT that serves Western Colorado, to talk about eligibility and regional teams.
Great, thank you so much, Andy. So going into eligibility, as we mentioned, these are regional teams. So we're kind of defining those as 3 or more entities working together. Every regional community team is going to need a lead applicant or lead community. And with the eligibility basic requirements here around rural, the lead applicant needs to check all of these boxes. Other communities that may want to participate, but maybe don't check all of those boxes can certainly participate in the regional team, but they can't be the lead if they're not rural or in an eligible rural county. That said, we are taking an inclusive approach to who else can participate. If a regional community team shares an economy, and we'll get into that in a future slide, with a municipality or county that's not eligible, it makes sense to include them so that the communities can create a truly regional informed recovery roadmap. While we may not be able to provide resources or services directly to those ineligible communities within the grant funding, we're happy to support their involvement for a better outcome. So this is how we're defining rural for the scope of this project. All counties in Colorado, with the exception of Boulder County, the city and county of Broomfield, the city and county of Denver, Jefferson County and Douglas County are considered rural. Within those counties, municipalities with populations under 50,000 are considered rural. Participating jurisdictions should also be rural in character. So how do we define rural character? That's something that we're going to leave up to the regional community team and especially the lead applicant community. You can best describe what your rural character is in both your letter of interest as well as your future application. Next slide, please. Another key condition of this is that is just the reality that we know that all regions are impacted by COVID, but they may be impacted differently. And we're very open to hearing how your region defines vulnerability. The project does require that the region can demonstrate a particular need or vulnerability, especially due to COVID-19 impacts. But some of the other vulnerability indicators as currently tracked by the State Demography Office can include a high percentage of job loss due to COVID-19, a basic industry or economic weakness, for example, enhanced enterprise zone status, opportunity zone status, being identified as a just transition from coal community, those types of indicators. Your regional partnership could also have an over-reliance on one industry or employer or company, or there may be persistent socioeconomic vulnerabilities like high unemployment, poverty, low per capita income, education, minority population, or language barriers. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, this opportunity is devoted to regional community teams from rural areas only, as we discussed in eligibility. But we're also equally committed to selecting teams from all over the state. This map kind of shows you the various regions that DOLA covers across the state of Colorado. And those DOLA regional managers that are linked to at the bottom of the map are here to help coordinate interest within as well as across regions. So this map is a reference point only, but when forming your teams, you don't need to limit your partners to fall within the boundaries illustrated in this map. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that the regional teams need to prove a shared economy. we define shared economy in a couple of broad strokes. One is a high concentration of jobs and or revenue that comes from one industry. For example, agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, et cetera. I know for a lot of our communities, tourism may be one of those linkages. And one differentiation that we do want to make is that there's a parallel opportunity happening within the Colorado Tourism Office that is devoted to completely to restarting and reimagining the Colorado tourism industry. So as we're building the frequently asked question sheets that will follow this webcast, we'll have some more information about that opportunity. So our award and our grant opportunity is basically for all of those communities with the exception of purely tourism devoted projects. As you're forming your regional teams, if you want to look up some local regional data that might be of interest to help prove those points, we've included a link to the state demographer's website at the bottom that deals with some key economic indicators. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, for the prior one too, for the letter of interest, you're just asked to present a statement as to how your jurisdictions have an interconnected economy. Those other kind of key criteria components would come in the application phase. So we're not asking too much on the letter of interest. So local support, who is at the table as part of your regional team? Because our economies are so intertwined and interdependent, it's important that all participating communities feel represented and heard, and they get and sustain broad engagement from various stakeholders. These could be business support and industry leaders, elected officials, government and nonprofit service providers, regional governments, potentially higher education, underrepresented and general community voices, stakeholder, maybe special interest groups, definitely emergency managers or local recovery groups if those exist in your area, and regional area and health department officials. The list that we have here isn't exhaustive or exclusive. We totally recognize that in many of our rural communities, some of these community assets or groups may not even exist. This is just really provided as a starting point to think about who would you want as your regional team table. Next slide. The other thing that you want to think about as you're building that regional team is what do they bring to the table? We encourage you to look for partners who can support not just developing a plan together, but then can participate and sustain support to continue to evaluate, update, and most importantly, implement the projects that we identify through these plans. What's expected of those participating communities and partners is broad support and involvement. So outreach, getting and sustaining engagement of lots of different stakeholders from different sectors, assisting the regional economic recovery project manager with reporting. They'll do the work for you, but we will need some data from you to inform that. And then keeping the state team updated on any hurdles, barriers, progress, those sorts of things that may come up throughout the progress, even if it's not maybe a regularly scheduled meeting. You also need to demonstrate commitment and capacity for a 2-year commitment. This includes, of course, working with the state partnership team, all of your dedicated people included in that, and then providing local data, interim communications, and participating in regular regional planning activities. We would also expect you to participate in those ongoing peer exchange pieces that are so important with the other participating regional community teams. And then implementation, this is looking beyond that 2-year scope. We're hoping to get some of those pieces started and connected, but totally understand that it might take longer than 2 years for some of the things identified. So definitely a commitment to that longer term view. Next slide, please. And then finally, your approach, as Kate had mentioned at the beginning, if COVID has taught us anything or any of the disasters that we may have been through or are currently experiencing, is that you need to take a flexible, equitable, resiliency-focused, and multi-objective approach. We've seen over the past few challenging months how quickly plans and strategies need to be flexible and how they need to be able to adapt. So consider a broad approach to make your whole connected economy more resilient. This process is definitely not designed to plan for a single project or outcome, but for multiple actionable projects that result in resilient community and economic outcomes. For the letter of interest, we ask you to provide a description of the key community and economic challenges and opportunities that this roadmap action planning might help address. You're welcome to include a high-level list of some of the top COVID recovery-related projects or initiatives that are currently underway or planned in your region, as well as other projects that may still be on the shelf. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Marguerite to take you through the next steps of getting started.
Thank you, Kat. And thank you all for listening. Just to wrap up, I want to emphasize that we would love to hear from you, and we are available to answer any of your questions about how to form regional teams and what we're looking for in your building of regional teams. So begin discussing amongst yourself, and please talk to your DOLA regional manager. Really, one of the main intentions of asking for this letter of interest is to understand who is interested and how we can connect people who do have a shared economy and shared issues and needs around COVID recovery. And so speaking to your DOLA regional manager will be really helpful for making those connections. And again, the deadline for submitting your letter of interest is December 1st. We will not disqualify anyone who doesn't submit a letter of interest, but again, we highly encourage it for your regional team to form quickly because a formal application will be following after that. And so we have this link here, the coloradoresiliency.com COVID-19 recovery roadmaps is where we have an FAQ. We will upload this other resources there, and you can stay up to date at that website. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and we hope to hear from you. Have a great day.